only did it feel like an eternity ago, it was truly an eternity ago. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala accept all of our good deeds in Ramadan and in the days of Dhul Hijjah and now in the days of Muharram and all throughout the year. Allahumma ameen. So $1 million question, which hadith are we on now? What number would we be on? 15. We are on hadith number 15. Now, this hadith that we're going to cover has a strong background to it. There is a strong context to it. And it's about a very famous pact of justice in Islam. But today we're going to do something which is unique in that we'll actually extract rulings from that pact. And the hadith surrounds what's known as Hilf-al-Fadool, the pact of justice, the coalition of the virtuous. And this is a very famous incident in Islam. I don't want to spend too much time on all the technicalities of it because you could simply Google Hilf-al-Fadool, even in English, and you will get all the technical details about what year it was and where it took place and how many people were present and whether this person was present or not. I really want to focus on the implications of Hilf-al-Fadool and what it means for us today. But I'll give you a brief summary of it. Obviously, the way that things operated in Mecca at the time of the Prophet ﷺ, there were various layers of class. Some of those layers were based on your economic status, so the rich could devour the poor. Some were based, and actually the majority were based on tribe. So if you were a poor man that belonged to a powerful tribe, you were in a better state than a rich man that belonged to a not so powerful tribe. Okay? Some of it was race, but it seems, believe it or not, that in those times race was probably minimal compared to the other factors that were taken into consideration. Mainly, all of the discussions about asabiyya or tribalism are referring to just that people that belong to different tribes and people's value was based upon what tribe they came from. And this is what the Prophet ﷺ had in his favor, is that he belonged to a very virtuous tribe. So even though the Prophet ﷺ was an orphan, even though he was poor, him belonging to Banu Hashim did give him certain leverage in society, and he utilized that, alayhi salatu wasalam, for others. So Hilf al-Fadool also addresses, the Pact of Justice also addresses the idea of, and it's still practiced today, but this idea of wakala and people being entrusted. So someone from a more powerful tribe, defending or taking under their guardianship or care someone that does not have that. So what that could mean is that a person has no tribe, or a person is from another country, or a person does not have any real status or connections, and because there is an obligation that arises out of contract, or because you owe someone something, I, belonging to that powerful tribe, will say, you know what, I will protect you, I'll take you in, and I will assure your rights. So it could be that someone comes from another place, does not have all of those privileges, but they are entrusted to someone with those privileges. So Hilf al-Fadool arose because there was a man from Yemen that came to Mecca, and the person that he exchanged with just told him that he wasn't going to pay him his money. And the man that refused to pay him his money knew that he could get away with that because no one would be there to protect him. He was an outsider. He also had no connections in Mecca. So if someone said, you know what, I'm just not going to pay you, deal with it, you can just go, that was something that was acceptable. And subhanAllah, when you talk about return to some of the features of the days of ignorance, in some Muslim countries, that, where people that are not the natives of those certain countries are treated like second-class citizens and are subject to this harsh system. They're not allowed to own businesses. They're not allowed to maintain all of their wealth. They have to be entrusted to someone. If the caretaker, who's a native of that country, decides one day to take your wealth and simply go drop you off at the airport, and could actually tell the people at the airport, tell the authorities, send him back home, he could get away with it with absolutely no consequences. And this is a return to many of the features of the days of ignorance. That violence could be perpetrated against people that don't belong to the land and that don't have that tribal status or that nationality, that you could steal their money, you could do whatever you want to them, but they're not even second-class citizens. They're just not even treated like human beings. So this feature was present, and there was an episode that was created out of this, which this man decided to make a big deal about it. So he shamed the Meccans. He stood next to the Kaaba and started authoring poetry about the shame of Mecca and the shame of those tribes. And you people who claim to be a people who are noble, and look at how you treat people, and authored poem after poem, and basically utilized the social media of his times to stomp his feet, to make a big deal about the wrongdoing that was committed towards him. So he shamed the Meccans into having to discuss this. What do we do about this? So they came together in the house of Abdullah ibn Jud'an, who was a very famous man before, in the time of the Prophet ﷺ. He died before the Prophet ﷺ received revelation. A very wealthy man, a very charitable man, someone that used to take care of all the pilgrims and all the visitors to Mecca. So he was really entrusted with this idea of hospitality, taking care of the people that came from outside. So he convened a meeting in his home. Present in that meeting were the Prophet ﷺ and Abu Bakr as-Siddiq radiallahu ta'ala anhu. So this is before Islam, and the Prophet ﷺ and Abu Bakr were the two youngest men, according to some narrations, in that meeting, which tells you something about the character of the Messenger alayhi salatu wasalam, even before Islam, and it tells you about where his priorities were and how his fitrah was guiding him, how Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala was guiding him. His natural inclination was towards compassion and justice and mercy, even before he received revelation, alayhi salatu wasalam. They came together in this home, and they decided to make a pact amongst themselves with the tribes that were present and those that would agree to sign off. So the tribes that signed off, Banu Hashim, tribe of the Prophet ﷺ, Banu Muttalib, who were the maternal tribe of the Prophet ﷺ, and this was of course also, Banu Muttalib was placed under boycott later on, along with Banu Hashim, so they're the kin of Banu Hashim, Banu Zuhra, Banu Asad, and Banu Taym. These are the tribes that took part in this pact, and the pact was بِنُصْرَةِ الْمَظْلُومِ, that we will support the wronged one, no matter what his tribe is, no matter where he comes from, we will always stand with the one who is wronged. So we will establish this pact amongst ourselves, and collectively we will throw our weight, even if it's not someone that falls under this umbrella. So it's not just that if someone from Banu Hashim wrongs someone from Banu Asad, that we will side with the wronged one collectively. No, if someone even outside of this pact is wrong, we will collectively throw our weight behind establishing and ensuring justice for the one that was wronged. And they took this pact, and subhanAllah, there was a notable tribe that was missing from this pact, and it was Banu Umayyah. So Banu Umayyah abstained from Hilf-al-Fadool. Banu Umayyah is one of the most powerful tribes, and of course a tribe that showed notable hostility to the Prophet ﷺ when he started his da'wah. For the most part, this was one of the tribes that did not accept Islam and that abstained from accepting the conditions that the Prophet ﷺ proposed through Islam. So they came together, and it was also called Hilf-al-Mutayyibin. They dipped, which is the pact or the pledge of the perfumed, because they dipped their hands in henna or some tib, and then they put it on the Kaaba all together, and they pledged that they will stand together now for the support of those that are oppressed. Anyone that is wronged will collectively have their right upheld by all of these tribes together, these powerful tribes and these powerful people. So it was a turning point in the history of Mecca. And you've got to understand, I mean, when you look through the history of Mecca and Medina, these are people, that would go to war for hundreds of years because someone killed somebody else's camel. I mean, literally. All right. If you read about what started the Basus War or the Fijar, all of these different wars, Arab wars, it was something so silly. It would start off with a petty conflict that would just evolve into an all-out war between tribes, right? So this is a significant turning point for the people of Mecca. So the Prophet ﷺ said later on, as we all know, he said, لو دعيت إلى مثله في الإسلام لأجبت الداعي. If I was called to something similar to it in Islam, I would listen to the caller. I would respond to the caller. Meaning, even if someone was to initiate Hilf-al-Fadool, now, this pact of justice now, I would respond to that call. Now that hadith, the Prophet ﷺ is indicating that if a similar pact is called, or if anything is invoked of the nature of Hilf-al-Fadool, that I will be the first to join it. In another narration, the Prophet ﷺ said, from Abdurrahman ibn Auf, شَهِدْتُ مَا عُمَامَتِي حِلْفَ الْمُطَيِّبِينَ. He said that I witnessed with my uncles the pact of the perfumed, referring to Hilf al-Fadool. He says, فَمَا أُحِبُّ أَنْ أَنْكُثَهُ. He said that I would not want to sever it, وَلَوْ بِحُمْرِ النِّعَمِ, even if I was to be given red camels in exchange. Red camels, of course, were the most prized possession, the most prized assets of the Arabs. And the Prophet ﷺ said, I would not sever Hilf al-Fadool even if you gave me all the money in the world. There is nothing that would cause me to sever it. So that indicates what? That the Hilf, the pact, was still intact. It still was upheld and to be maintained. The one that was taken that time, even after Islam. And even though many of the participants of the agreement did not become Muslim, not everyone that was in that room or belonged to those tribes accepted Islam, the Prophet ﷺ said he's still willing to uphold that pact with all of those people, even if they were rejecting him now as a prophet, so long as they were maintaining the principles that were agreed upon in that pact. And he continued to act upon it after Islam. Now, what would make this hadith very powerful is to analyze when the Prophet ﷺ said this. Meaning what? If the Prophet ﷺ said this in Mecca, when he was undergoing persecution, and the people came to him and said, well, what do we do about Hilf al-Fadool? And he's in a position of weakness. He's a minority in Mecca as Muslims, they're persecuted, and the Prophet ﷺ said, we'll still maintain it if they want to maintain it. Well, it's easy to say that when you're one of the oppressed, and when you're one of the persecuted. But when did the Prophet ﷺ say this? According to the majority of the scholars of hadith, it was after Fatah Mecca, after the conquest of Mecca, meaning when the Prophet ﷺ was at the height of his power, when he solidified power over Mecca and Medina. And the Prophet ﷺ says, you know what? That hilf, that pact is still intact, even with those that chose to remain upon idolatry. That's powerful. Because the Prophet ﷺ is saying that he will continue to be held accountable because he now belongs to the ruling class, that we will continue to ensure accountability across the board, even though the Prophet ﷺ could have absolved it. The reason why many of the scholars of hadith say that this discussion took place after Fatah Mecca, after the conquest of Mecca, is because after the conquest of Mecca, the Meccans, the Muslims, were really confused about what was upheld and what was not to be upheld. Whether that was in theology or whether that was in seemingly virtuous things that took place before Islam. So for example, in their theology, the Muslims did not know what to maintain of Hajj. Because there was a Hajj in the days of ignorance, some semblance of the Hajj of Ibrahim alayhi salam and the prophets, but it was way off. And the Muslims didn't know what parts of it would be upheld and what parts of it would be disregarded. Prominently, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala discusses in the Quran, إِنَّ الصَّفَا وَالْمَرْوَةَ مِنْ شَعَائِرِ اللَّهِ فَمَنْ حَجَّ الْبَيْتَ وَاعْتَمَرَ فَلَا جُنَاحَ عَلَيْهِ أَنْ يَطَّوَّفَ بِهِمَا. That Safa and Marwa are from the rituals of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, from the signs of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Whoever goes to Hajj or Umrah, then there is no blame on them if they perform the rituals there, because the Muslims didn't know. So does this mean now we only do tawaf and we do away with sa'i? What parts of Hajj are parts of Hajj? So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala affirmed the parts of Hajj that were correct, and the Messenger alayhi salatu wasalam disregarded the parts that were not from the original Hajj. Likewise now with their societal contracts. When the Messenger alayhi salatu wasalam stood up and this is just to understand the spirit in which this hadith came. When the Prophet ﷺ stood up and he gave his farewell speech, okay, his khutbatul wada' in Mecca, his farewell speech in Mecca, the Prophet ﷺ condemned usury, he condemned interest in riba, And he said that whoever owes anyone else riba, it's abolished. It doesn't hold anymore. So the Prophet ﷺ clarified what pre-existing agreements held and what pre-existing agreements were to be nullified. And the Messenger ﷺ maintained the integrity of this particular pact, which is very powerful and very beautiful, and it gives us many rulings to take into consideration. Number one, this pact gives Muslims a precedent for the moral responsibility of all citizens to protect the weak and to speak for them, to critique the powerful, and to establish groups and pacts that lobby for social rights. There is a precedent here that's given to us in this hilf, because the Prophet ﷺ upheld the original one, and the Prophet ﷺ said, if I'm called to something like it, I will still respond to it. That this is something that is in perfect, that is perfectly congruent with the teachings of Islam and the values of Islam, that people should come amongst themselves. And they should establish agreements and coalitions of this nature. And the spirit of those coalitions should be to speak for the weak, to speak for the voiceless, to raise their voices, and to lobby for their rights. So this is a precedent that we have from it. We also see that the Prophet ﷺ acknowledged through this that Muslims could work with people that were not Muslims in such pacts and coalitions. That even though there were things that were hated to the Prophet ﷺ, that the Prophet ﷺ would still be willing to partake in these types of agreements with these people. Even if there are bigger issues. All right, this is where the contemporary understanding has to come in. Even if there are bigger issues that are present, if a people are coming together to form a coalition to achieve a specific noble goal, they can all cooperate for that. What's the proof of that? The Prophet ﷺ, when the people came together to establish economic justice in this case, Hilf-al-Fadool was really because this man's money was not paid back to him. Did the Prophet ﷺ stand back and say, you know what? You people bury your daughters alive. You people, do Hajj and Tawaf without clothes. You people have major, major, major issues. I'm not going to touch any of you people or have anything to do with you people because I can't stand your lifestyle. And worse than that, even before Islam, the Prophet ﷺ did not worship idols. The Prophet ﷺ did not say, you know what? You guys you go deal with your shirk and deal with your burying your daughters alive and deal with all the horrible things you're doing, and then we can talk about Hilf-al-Fadool. He didn't do that, sallallahu alaihi wasallam, because the goal was very specific and it was a noble goal in and of itself, and so long as the pact is specific to that goal and not a general alliance to where the presence in that alliance could be taken as an endorsement for the other actions of other tribes or other people in that alliance, it was fine. It was okay. That's where the line has to be drawn. And the Prophet ﷺ was still willing to affirm that. The same man, alayhi salatu wasalam, who when he walked into Mecca and he removed the idols from the haram, the Prophet ﷺ was still willing to work with these people that maintained their idolatry so long as it was for a specific noble goal, even if he still hated some of their outstanding issues. Okay, do you guys understand that concept? Is it clear from this hadith? Kind of, sort of? Inshallah. Maybe in the question and answer we'll have some more. The pact also teaches Muslims to embrace anything that's for the betterment of humanity in this life or the next. And this is a very powerful ayah in the Quran where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, وَتَعَاوَنُوا عَلَى الْبِرِّ وَالتَّقْوَى, to cooperate with one another in righteousness and piety. And many of the mufassirin, they said al-birr, righteousness, refers to well-being in this world. And taqwa refers to well-being in the hereafter. So ta'awun should be based on one of the two things, and preferably for both. Ala al-birr, you either do ta'awun. For birr, you either come together for the well-being in this world, the well-being of people in this world, or you come together for the well-being of people in the hereafter through taqwa. So the nature of these alliances is that they have to come together for one of those two things. And this is something that Muslims often, well, we have to pay very close attention to, because sometimes there is a seemingly just cause, but that just cause is being hijacked by a malicious agenda. And so Muslims have to look at the pros and cons of achieving that goal, and everything should be seen in the light of achieving al-birr wa taqwa, one of the two or both, when these types of pacts and when these types of coalitions are taken. Number 4 or number 5, where am I? Who's taking notes? 4? All right. You don't want to be doing the sign on, Number 4, the pact doesn't only apply when Muslims are a minority and in a state of weakness. Rather, these types of pacts should and could be initiated when Muslims are in a position of power. Why do I mention this? Because there's this thinking that, you know what, Muslims have to settle for these types of things because right now we're weak. Once we get powerful, we don't have to worry about upholding the rights of anybody else. We just want to have our rights upheld. Once we get our rights upheld, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gives us power, then we don't have to worry about these types of pacts and coalitions and so on and so forth. No, the Prophet ﷺ affirmed that pacts of this nature could and should be initiated even when Muslims are in a state of power, because usually the discussions of Hilf-al-Fadool take place only amongst Muslim minorities or in relation to Muslim minorities. That Muslim minorities would speak about this importance of upholding a pact of this sort for the sake of someone else. Number 5, the ulama say that invoking this pact is not restricted to collaboration with people of other faiths only, but a pact of this nature could also be initiated amongst Muslims to resolve disagreements amongst themselves or to uphold rights amongst themselves. All right, and I'll get to a very strong proof for that, inshallah ta'ala, in a few minutes. But the point is, can these types of pacts be established amongst Muslims? Can Muslims amongst themselves come together and say, we're going to establish a coalition that will ensure that, that this takes place and that this takes place? I'll give you an example. If the masajid came together and they said, we're going to ensure that certain principles are upheld in all of the masajid so that people are not wronged. And if someone complains of something in one masjid, then all of the masajid would step in. Or if something happens here, then all of us would come together. Or if one masjid is struggling, all of us will come together to uplift that masjid. These types of coalitions are good. They're good. Any type of pact, and it can be binding Islamically. It can be taken as a contract of sorts, where people come together and say, we will uphold the rights of so-and-so, even if it's purely amongst Muslims, or used to resolve disagreements amongst Muslims, then we should do so. I'm on number 6, right? Number 6. The ulama say that the Prophet ﷺ, when he said, هَلْ تُرْزَقُونَ وَتُنْصَرُونَ إِلَّا بِضُعَفَائِكُمْ, are you supported or given victory by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala except by how you treat your poor? The Prophet ﷺ was showing that barakah, blessings, come to a society as a whole when they uphold the rights of the weakest. There's a very powerful point that we don't see in many books here. In Mecca, you know what Hilf al-Fadool did for them? Because we know that dhulm ruins a society. The presence of oppression ruins a society. It leads to a society being devoid of blessings and horrible things happening to that society as a whole, because eventually that lack of accountability leads to everyone suffering. But you know what happened in Mecca? In Mecca, when these tribes came together and did Hilf al-Fadool, it actually led to a boom in their economy, because people from other countries and other tribes were now less hesitant to do business with the people in Mecca. SubhanAllah. So particularly there was a boom. If you read in Tarikh al-Arab, in the history of the Arabs and the history of Mecca in particular, a boom in business from Yemen. Okay? Because there was an understanding that we're going to get wronged if we go into business with people in Mecca. When they opened that up and when the news of Hilf al-Fadool spread, it led to more blessing in their economic transactions. All right? So this leads to the betterment of society as a whole. When people come together and they do this, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala opens doors for that society, even if it's not a Muslim society. If all non-Muslims came together in a society and said, you know what, we're going to uphold the rights of the weak, we're going to establish justice, Allah would place barakah, blessing in that society for that reason. And that's a powerful lesson that we take from the history of the Meccans in this situation. Lastly, was this pact ever invoked after Islam in effect? Okay? Was this pact ever invoked after Islam in effect? So we know that the Prophet ﷺ, in principle, he confirmed it in Islam and said, I would oblige if I was called to similar agreements and similar pacts to do this type of stuff. But did it ever actually happen? This is a powerful incident that took place not too long after the Prophet ﷺ. It took place about 70 years after the Prophet ﷺ. The Emir of Medina was Uthman ibn Abi Sufyan. And he wronged the man and he refused to pay him back his money. Now realize the Prophet ﷺ particularly wanted to establish this type of accountability for leadership. He's saying that even now when I'm in power, Hilf-al-Fadool should stand. These types of pacts should stand. So Uthman ibn Abi Sufyan wronged this man, and he's the governor of Medina, he's the Emir of Medina, and he refused to give this man back his money. Al-Husayn ibn Ali, radiyallahu anhuma, he stood up and he said, Wallahi, la in lam tu'id lahu mala, la unadiyanna bihilf al-Fudul. Al-Husayn was from Banu Hashim. And so he stood up and he said, I swear by Allah, if you do not give him back his money, then I will invoke Hilf al-Fudul. Guess who else stood up? Abdullah ibn Zubayr, and he was from Banu Asad, the tribe of Khadija radiallahu ta'ala anha. Banu Asad. And Abdullah ibn Zubayr stood up and he said, and I will invoke Hilf al-Fudul too. So the original tribe, the descendants of the people that ratified that original pact started to stand up. Abdurrahman ibn al-Harith, he stood up and said, وَأَنَا مَعَكُمْ. Muhammad ibn Talha from Banu Zuhra, he stood up and said, and I am with you, وَأَنَا مَعَكُمْ. And because they all stood up and they invoked Hilf al-Fudul, Uthman ibn Abi Sufyan gave the man back his money and he backed off. So not only was this a pact that could be invoked in principle or something similar to it, but it was something that the Prophet ﷺ invoked in spirit. And of course, in conclusion, Rasulullah ﷺ, of course, was bothered by the practices of Quraysh even as a young man. He never was comfortable with their practices. He wasn't comfortable with their immorality. He wasn't comfortable with their shirk, with their polytheism. He wasn't comfortable with their injustice and dhulm. But the Prophet ﷺ was always eager to improve whatever conditions he was capable of improving. And as Muslims, we should take a great lesson in that the dhulm, because it's very easy to get overwhelmed. Like, where do we even start in solving the problem of injustice? It's very easy for us to be overwhelmed. But the Prophet ﷺ teaches us that it is part of our deen, that we join hands with people for very specific causes, and if we can do away with conditions of oppression in some capacities, then that slowly chips away at the spirit that allows oppression to be maintained and allows injustice to be maintained. We ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to use us to establish justice amongst our communities, both internally within the Muslim community and generally in our society as a whole. And we ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to bring ease to those who are suffering. Allahumma ameen. Questions? You guys look tired. Let me ask you a question first. After Maghrib next week or after Isha? So raise your hand if you want it after Maghrib. Are you guys too tired to raise hands? All right. Well, please don't do this. Can you raise your hands if you want to do after Maghrib? Let me actually. All right. Hands down. Raise your hands if you want to keep it after Isha. Oh man, I hate it when this happens. We gotta flip a coin. It's completely even. All right, one more time after Maghrib. 18, 19, 21. All right, okay, I didn't see this whole side. All right, hands down. Raise your hand after Isha. slightly after Maghrib, so we're going to keep it after Maghrib, inshallah ta'ala. Yes. Okay. Daylight savings time are in 1 month. It's in November. November is in a month and a week, right? It's in 5. My preference is what's more comfortable for you guys. I have no preference, inshallah. I can handle either one. Is Aisha moving next week? Anybody? No, is Aisha moving to 8:30 though? 2 weeks? Keep it what? Keep it after Maghrib until daylight savings time? Okay, we'll do that, inshallah. Just because there are more people that raise their hands for that, and I know a lot of people have put their kids to sleep, and there were some people maybe that couldn't even be present, that would have been present after Maghrib. So I apologize to the after Isha crowd. The good news is you could watch the replay online, although I prefer to have the barakah, obviously, of people coming together in the presence of the malaika, and the angels, bidnillahi ta'ala. So questions now. Yeah. No parades. Parades are not. Unless you're in New Orleans and it's like one of the really halal Mardi Gras parades, it's like out on the outskirts where it's just. No, we should stay away from parades. MLK parade, maybe, that's an exception. In coalition building, and I'd like you guys, so this was an article I wrote after. I wrote it a couple of months ago, I think. Muslims in the left, can social conservatives participate in social justice? And I was sort of pushing back on this idea that it's all or nothing, that we have to uncritically embrace everything out there just so that Muslims can become more mainstream and we can become more acceptable, that we can remain devout and principled and unambiguous about certain things while still partaking in social justice on certain issues. And the crux of those issues in social justice, there are things that, that divide the nation, and they are highly symbolic, but there are things like healthcare. Where is the Muslim presence on healthcare? Right? The specific advocacy on these issues: poverty, healthcare, immigration, police brutality, the criminal justice system. All of these are things that Muslims can not, should actively join coalitions and form coalitions, inshallah ta'ala, and be at the forefront of these issues. That's true to our deen. And the more specific the issue, the less problematic the coalition. The more specific the issue, the less problematic the coalition. So if we're coming together to deal with this particular issue, it doesn't matter who's at the table because it's all about this issue and we're going to deal with this particular issue. If we're forming general alliances, then it can become problematic because then that's where intersectionality becomes tricky, because that suggests that everyone is on equal footing, and that can become problematic. So I'm for Muslims joining coalitions that are specific, that are issue specific, and Muslims having ihsan in those things, like really excelling in those things. If you were to join a coalition to end homelessness in Dallas, and you gave all of your volunteer time to ending homelessness in Dallas, and you excelled in the war on homelessness, then you would be doing a great service to the ummah and a great service to your society. So I think specific issues allow for advocacy and alliance to be less problematic. And if people don't want us at a table because of our orthodoxy, well, then that's a sign that we should not be partaking in certain things. And that's an article, if you get a chance to read it, inshallah. So it's Muslims and the left, can social conservatives participate in social justice? Something like that. I forgot the title. It was something like that. Even though I wrote it, it's been a while. Yeah. I have no, what do you mean? Speak up on what though? If there are issues of clear dhulm, speak up. If there are issues of confusion, stay silent. That's a very specific issue. That's when you have to make an appointment with Sheikh Yasser Burjas and talk to him and see if it sounds, I'm just messing around. Again, so if it's a clear issue of right and wrong, it's always good to speak on the right side. But can you be a little bit more like what exactly? Okay. Your voice is not your only medium of participation. Sometimes your presence is participation. Sometimes your hands are participation. So if I'm not the most effective voice on an issue, I can still be support on that issue. SubhanAllah, I can't tell you all, the march to end police brutality that took place in Ramadan this year, where some of you were out there cooking in the sun, during that march, every time I meet the people that organized that march, they just keep talking about how awesome the Muslim presence was. Like it was shocking to them that the Muslims were present in the heat, the summer, during Ramadan. So presence sometimes doesn't even necessitate voice, but it just means something. It's solidarity. And you can volunteer. There's so many things that we can do, inshallah. Yeah. Oh, that's a great look. So the question is, what if you join a coalition, but you don't really, you don't trust the intentions of the other parties that are there? In activism in particular, you have to I think a lot of times people are present for essentially dunyawi objectives, worldly objectives. So it's reputation, it's, they want to be on the record for having supported this cause. It's sort of like how NFL owners that donated $1 million to Trump's inaugural committee, including the one Muslim owner in the NFL, was part of a protest against Trump's word. So you've got, people will play these different sides, and people will take stances on issues sometimes for very wrong reasons. I think that if you can still utilize, if you can maintain the effectiveness of that coalition to attain goals, then you should do so, especially if the power that exists within that coalition cannot be found outside of it. So if you can bring people together and sort of force their hand, the biggest example I can think of, like really contemporary example, is the Confederate memorials. So I was on the committee dealing with the Confederate memorials. I was literally in Jordan. I had my Skype open, and I was communicating with the organizers in real time when that demonstration was going on. We were coordinating meetings with city council members. With the Confederate memorials, the removal of the Confederate memorials, when we first started to apply pressure, we were getting like no's from most of them. It was like, all right, maybe we can force 5 to at least put it on the agenda, 5 of the 14 city council members. But then it led to, the amount of pressure that we exerted publicly. Suddenly, all of these city council members wanted to go on the record, and it was no longer a discussion of should we bring it down. It was a matter of who wants to have the flair of being the one that put the agenda item on there and led the charge and getting their statements on record. So it was a 13-1 vote, with the one just abstaining from vote. And it was crazy to see how people flipped, and the people that were telling us one thing when we met them in their offices suddenly were like they were literally saying what we said to them when we pushed back. So you know what? Sometimes you got to force people's hands, and you just have to go with that. I think, but being involved in long-term coalition building, you do want to find sincere parties, people that you can work with, people that you can achieve good things with, inshallah ta'ala. And you'll find people that just want to do things out of the goodness of their hearts and because they believe in certain causes. You can find those. find those people around. Yeah. Hmm. No, the man wasn't killed. So the question is, what was the intention of Quraysh when they gathered together? They were shamed. So it kind of, in a way, Faisal, it kind of answers your question. Like when they gathered together, a lot of those people were there because they felt like their reputation had just been soiled. It wasn't because they actually wanted to uphold the rights of the man. It was like, man, we just got called out, for the way we treat people. So we have to do some damage control here. There were certainly people there. Abdullah ibn Jud'an, the one who initiated that, was notoriously a generous man and a man who used to serve people. So you could assume, for example, that he, convening that meeting in his home, that he actually, believed that there was something inherently wrong with the Meccan system. But certainly there were parties there that were probably there just because they felt like they got called out. And the pressure amongst them led to them taking that particular stand. Yeah. Like Joel Osteen didn't open his church initially? Then he got shamed. Did he even open his church after that? I mean, did they? Oh, okay. I was in Hajj. Yeah. All right. Last question. You pull out when the goals are not being achieved, when the agendas are overtaking the purpose of the group. That's when you pull out. All right, Jazakumullah khairan. So next week after Maghrib, inshaAllah ta'ala, until daylight savings time.